All right, let's jump into another deep dive, shall we? We are heading to the Amazon rainforest today, a place that, it just has this sort of mystique about it, I think.
Mhm.
And we're going to unpack the mystery surrounding Percy Fawcett, a British explorer who vanished while searching for this lost city that he called Z.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that just grabs you, the adventure, the obsession, and that allure of the unknown.
I know, it's really cool. And you know what's really interesting is we've got this YouTube video from Decoding the Unknown that's going to guide us through this.
Yeah.
And they set the scene really well. So think early 20th century. This is like the golden age of exploration, right? And the Amazon was still this massive, uncharted wilderness,
Yeah.
full of danger, but also just this insane amount of potential for incredible discoveries.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And remember,
Yeah.
this was back when the idea of lost civilizations wasn't considered totally out there. Machu Picchu had just been rediscovered in 1911, so it proved that these amazing ancient cities could be hidden right there, just waiting to be found.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so you've got this backdrop of excitement and potential.
Right.
And then you have Percy Fawcett, who was not just some random dude who decided to wander into the jungle.
No, not at all. He was a soldier, a skilled cartographer. He was even a member of the Royal Geographic Society.
And he had already completed 7 expeditions to South America
Yeah.
before this. So he wasn't exactly new to the whole exploration thing.
Oh, yeah, he was a seasoned explorer, known for his adventurous spirit and his respect for native cultures, which is interesting considering some of the views he held.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, he admired the indigenous people, but he also held some of the prejudices that were common back then. He believed in this idea of superior races. It's one of those things that makes him a much more complex figure and honestly much more fascinating.
Yeah, no doubt. It definitely adds another layer to the whole story. So how did Fawcett become so fixated on this lost city, this Z? What got him started on this path?
It seems like it all began with his observations during those earlier expeditions. He kept finding things that hinted at a more advanced civilization than people thought existed in the Amazon. Remnants of ancient roads, pottery shards, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. But I also read about this old document, Manuscript 512.
Yeah.
Supposedly, it described the ruins of this massive city found way back in 1753. Did that play a role in his obsession?
Oh, absolutely. Even though we can't actually verify if it's authentic or not, this manuscript was like Fawcett's holy grail. Imagine reading about plazas and arches and statues, a whole civilization just swallowed by the jungle. It's easy to see why he became convinced that this grand city was out there somewhere.
It does sound like something out of an adventure novel. Didn't Fawcett also have some pretty wild encounters during his travels?
Oh, he did. He had run-ins with giant anacondas, birds that could supposedly peck through stone, even tracks of what he thought was some kind of prehistoric beast. Some of his stories are so unbelievable that it's hard to tell what's real and what's, well, embellished.
I remember reading about him meeting white Indians with red hair and blue eyes. And he took that as evidence of this proto-Indian race. Maybe even connected to Atlantis? Atlantis? Seriously.
Yeah, and that's where things start to get really interesting. Because remember, this is after World War I, a time when spiritualism was becoming pretty popular.
Right.
And Fawcett himself was getting more and more drawn to these ideas, especially the teachings of theosophy, which is all about Atlantis and hidden knowledge.
Okay, so now we're taking this mystery to a whole other level. Tell me more about this Atlantis connection.
Well, Fawcett got this black basalt idol from the author H.R. Haggard, and he was convinced that it held the key to finding Z. So he takes it to a psychic, right? And the psychic claims the idol shows visions of a lost continent.
You can't make this stuff up. I bet that psychic reading really solidified his belief that Z was some Atlantean outpost.
Oh, it definitely did. Although we know now that the idol was a fake. Which makes you wonder just how much of Fawcett's quest was driven by his own, hopes and interpretations.
So we've got scientific observations, ancient manuscripts, mythical creatures, and a sprinkle of Atlantis. It's like a recipe for an epic adventure. But before we get into that final expedition, let's talk more about this shift in Fawcett's thinking, his growing interest in spiritualism, all of that.
That's actually a huge part of this story. Because after the horrors of World War I, lots of people were feeling disillusioned with modern society. They were looking for something more. Spiritualism gave them a sense of hope, a sense of meaning. And you can see how Fawcett would find comfort in those ideas.
So you're saying this wasn't just a scientific expedition for him. It became this, spiritual quest, a search for a lost world that maybe held the answers to bigger questions.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so captivating. It's a mix of exploration and scientific inquiry with this deep longing for something more, something beyond the everyday world.
It sounds like he was a man driven by a very powerful vision. A vision that ultimately led him to risk everything on that last expedition in 1925.
And that's where things take a pretty dramatic turn.
Okay, so it's 1925, and Fawcett sets off with his son Jack and his friend, Raleigh Rimmel. What happened next? Like, do we even know?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? They just vanished, no trace, left everyone wondering what on earth happened to them. Imagine disappearing into the Amazon, like poof, just gone. It's a story that's captivated people for a century.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can see why there have been so many theories and expeditions trying to figure out what happened. It's like a real-life detective story, but with way higher stakes.
You got it. And just like a good mystery, there are false leads and clues that don't add up, and witnesses you can't always trust. Let's start with Commander George M. Dyott. He led one of the first search parties and was convinced that the Kalapalo tribe was responsible.
Why did he think that? Was there evidence or something?
He claimed he'd heard stories from local tribes about Fawcett's party being killed by the Kalapalo. Oh, and he found a brass plate that he thought belonged to the expedition.
Seemed pretty convincing, right? Yeah, it does, but I remember the video mentioning some issues with his theory. Like, wouldn't other tribes have known about it too? Is one story enough to blame the Kalapalo?
Good point. You're thinking like a real detective. And that's what other researchers were saying too. Turns out that brass plate wasn't even from the final expedition. It was actually from one of Fawcett's earlier trips, probably given to the tribe as a gift.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's one theory down.
Yeah.
What about other explanations? What else was out there?
Well, this other researcher, Vincenzo Petrulla from the Penn Museum, had a completely different idea. He thought Fawcett and his group probably died from natural causes.
Natural causes. I mean, the Amazon's no joke, but wouldn't someone have found their remains by now?
Possibly, but the Amazon is huge, and the jungle grows over things so fast. Petrulla's argument was that the jungle is just unforgiving, especially if you're not prepared. Hunger, dehydration, disease, any of those things could have done them in. Plus, he pointed out that if they'd been killed by natives, word would have spread pretty quickly, given how rare it was to see white men in that region.
That's a good point. So we've got one theory blaming a tribe, another saying it was the jungle itself. Anything else?
Oh, there's more. Remember those white Indians Fawcett wrote about? Well, that led to another theory, the idea that they might have joined up with some isolated tribe and decided to stay hidden.
Interesting. That kind of plays into that romantic idea of going native, right? Leaving civilization behind and all that.
Exactly. Well, let's not forget about Orlando Villas-Boas. Now, he was a Brazilian anthropologist who actually lived with these indigenous tribes. He claimed he got the real story from the Kalapalo tribe back in the 1950s.
Wait, hold on. So the Kalapalo tribe was back in the picture. What did Villas-Boas say happened?
Well, he told a few different versions of the story. In one, he said the tribe was offended by how the expedition was behaving. Like, Jack Fawcett supposedly urinated upstream from their village, and they refused to share their food properly. So, according to Villas-Boas, these cultural misunderstandings led to violence.
They were killed for bad manners. I don't know about that one.
Right. Seems a bit far-fetched. But then, Villas-Boas came up with another version, a darker one. This time, he claimed that Jack Fawcett had either raped or seduced the chieftain's wife, which obviously caused a huge problem.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy accusation. Makes you wonder what the motivations behind these different accounts are, you know?
Yeah.
I get that Villas-Boas spent years with these tribes, but his story keeps changing. Was he trying to make Fawcett look bad to fit some kind of agenda?
It's definitely possible. The Decoding the Unknown video brings up how the later, more dramatic versions of the story kind of line up with Villas-Boas's view that indigenous tribes were victims of colonialism.
Ah, okay, I see. So you're saying he might have been more likely to believe a story that painted Fawcett, a representative of that colonialism, in a negative light.
Could be. And to make things even more complicated, Villas-Boas never actually produced any solid evidence to back up his claims. He found some human remains, but they didn't match Fawcett.
So we have these different stories, all with their own biases and questions, and all seems really unclear. It's like every answer just leads to more questions.
And get this, just when you think it can't get any weirder, a gold signet ring that belonged to Fawcett shows up years later in a shop in Cuiabá. That's the city where the expedition started.
A signet ring? That's a weird detail. How did that end up there?
Some people think it was stolen from Fawcett, maybe during a robbery. Others think he might have used it to trade for supplies.
Like a puzzle with missing pieces. We have these clues, a brass plate, these conflicting stories, a random ring, but no way to put them together and get a clear picture.
That's the problem with historical mysteries like this. We might never know for sure what happened to Fawcett and his companions. The Amazon is so vast and constantly changing. Time has just wiped away most of the evidence. All we have left are these little bits and pieces, these whispers from the past.
I get it. It's fascinating, but also super frustrating. We have all these threads, but they don't quite come together and give us a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, and that's part of what keeps this story so interesting. We're drawn to the mystery, to the questions that haven't been answered. We want to solve it, to understand what happened to these guys who dared to go into the unknown.
And maybe in trying to figure out their story, we learn something about ourselves, you know, about our own fascination with exploration, our need to make sense of the past, and how we deal with uncertainty.
That's a really good point. We've been so focused on how they disappeared that we haven't even touched on the lost city of Z itself. Did Fawcett's obsession have any basis in reality?
Yeah, it's funny. We've been so focused on, like, the how and the why of Fawcett's disappearance that we haven't even really considered if this Z place even existed. Do you think he was totally off base? Or could there be something to it?
Well, it's easy to write off Fawcett's idea of a huge, like, Atlantean-style city as just, his imagination running wild, especially with the popular theories going around back then. But the thing is, our understanding of the Amazon is constantly evolving, even now.
So you're saying there's still a possibility he was onto something?
Think about it. Recent archaeological discoveries have actually proven that the Amazon was home to large, sophisticated settlements way before Europeans showed up, like Kukukugu, for example. It was this massive complex, intricate earthworks and everything, and the population was huge, rivaling lots of European cities back then.
Oh, I had no clue. That's amazing. So maybe there were these complex societies in the Amazon, even if they weren't exactly what Fawcett was picturing.
Exactly. It's totally possible that he might have stumbled across evidence of these societies and not even realized it. He was so fixated on finding the city that matched his idea of a lost civilization.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really makes you think about how our own biases and expectations can influence what we see and how we interpret things.
Definitely something to think about. Fawcett's whole vision was shaped by his romantic ideas of Atlantis and this belief that there's a hierarchy of civilizations with European culture at the top. It shows how even the most adventurous explorers can be limited by the thinking of their time.
It makes you wonder what else is out there in the Amazon, just waiting to be found by someone who's willing to see things differently, to challenge those old ways of thinking.
Exactly. And maybe that's the real legacy of Percy Fawcett. He might not have found the Z he was looking for, but his story reminds us of that basic human need to explore, to uncover the unknown and push the limits of what we think we know.
I like that. So for those of us listening, the armchair explorers, what's the takeaway from all of this? What can we learn from Fawcett's story?
I think it shows us that history is never black and white. It's a mix of truth and stories, ambition, and maybe a little delusion. And sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones we can't fully explain. Just like the Amazon, history is full of hidden depths, just waiting for someone to dive in.
And I think Fawcett's story is a reminder that exploration is about so much more than just finding new places. It's about that drive to push boundaries, the mystery, the courage to face the unknown, even if it means putting everything on the line. It reminds us that the search for knowledge, for understanding, can be both exhilarating and humbling.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And who knows? Maybe the real Z isn't a physical city at all. Maybe it represents the very idea of discovery, of the mysteries that keep us searching and questioning and exploring the world around us.
I love that. Maybe Z is that sense of wonder and possibility that drives us to learn, to discover, to broaden our horizons. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to explore, more to understand about the world and about ourselves.
Beautifully put. We may never have all the answers, but that journey is what makes it all worth it.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the mystery of Percy Fawcett and Lost City of Z. We hope you enjoyed the ride. And remember, the exploration doesn't have to stop here. Be sure to check out that Decoding the Unknown video and really dig into this story. There are tons of books and articles and documentaries out there just waiting to be discovered. So keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep.